Welcome to my music theory and reading music course. You can read every lesson in this series at your ease at pianotheoryexercises.com, where you will also find interactive exercises to practice what you've learned. Below this video you will find links to those lessons and exercises on the website. Also below this video you will find a link where you can download this whole music theory course as a free ebook, so don't miss this opportunity. And if my lessons helped you, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks a lot! In lesson 6 of the music theory series, I will teach you how to form a major scale. And I will start with the C major scale, since it's the easiest major scale, because the notes of the C major scale correspond with only white keys on the piano. So let's start. It starts on C. Then we go up to the next C by playing only white keys. So C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. So that's the C major scale. We call C the root of the C major scale. Now, what makes a major scale sound like a major scale? Well, this is because there are certain well-defined intervals between the consecutive notes of a major scale. So let's look at those intervals. I will start on C, going from C, which is the first note, the root, to the second note, the D, is one whole tone up. So the first interval between the first two notes of the major scale is a whole tone. Between the second and the third note is also a whole tone. Between the third and the fourth note, it's only a half tone. Between the fourth and the fifth, a whole tone. Between the fifth and the sixth, again a whole tone. Between the sixth and the seventh note, again a whole tone. And between the seventh and the last note, a half tone. Now, this series of intervals, 1, 1, a half, 1, 1, 1, a half, I call it the major scale formula, or simply the major formula. By the way, you could also write it as WWH, WWWH, where W stands for whole tone and H for half tone. Now I can use this major formula to find all the other major scales, since every major scale has the same intervals between the consecutive notes. So I can start on any note, just apply the formula to find the major scale. Let me do that, for example, for G. I will start on G, so I will look for the G major scale. So I use the formula, I go from G, one whole tone up, to A, another whole tone up, to B, then a half tone up, to C, a whole tone up, to D, a whole tone up, to E, now a whole tone up, and that brings me to F sharp. And the last interval was a half tone, and it brings me back to the root G, one octave higher. So the G major scale is G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G. Now notice that the G major scale has one black note, the F sharp. This in contrast to the C major scale with only white keys. Now, why do I call this note F sharp and not, for example, G flat? Because F sharp and G flat are enharmonic equivalent. They are two names for the same note. Well, imagine that I would call it G flat. Then my scale would be G, A, B, C, D, E, G flat, G. Now there's a rule, or actually two rules, that you can apply to tell you why this note can't be a G flat. Because the last three notes that I just mentioned, E, G flat, G, means that there are two times the letter G in G flat and in G. Now, one rule says you may not have two times the same letter. Well, this is only possible when you call this note an F sharp. The second rule says that the notes in a scale have to be consecutive letters out of the alphabet. There may be no whole. Now, if the last three notes of the scale were E, G flat, G, then between E and G flat I miss a letter. E is with the letter E, G flat is something with the letter G, I missed the letter F. The rule says that's not possible, so you can only fix this by saying that this is an F sharp. Now, you don't need both rules together. You pick out one of the two rules, either rule 1 or rule 2. To find all the other major scales, we use the major scale formula and one of the two rules. But actually, how many major scales are there? Well, there are as many major scales as there are different notes. How many notes are there? I already said that in the first lesson, but let me explain it again. So, starting on C, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And here I will be back on C again, so the pattern repeats. So there are 12 different notes. That means there are 12 different major scales. For now, we've seen the C major scale with only white keys, the G major scale with one black key, which is the F sharp. Let me show you one major scale that has a flat note. That's the F major scale. I'll start on F. I will use the major scale formula. So go up one whole tone to G, another whole tone to A, now a half tone to B flat, a whole tone to C, a whole tone to D, a whole tone to E, and a half tone to F, back to our root. Now, why did I call this note a B flat and not an A sharp? Well, just apply one of the two rules. I will now apply them both so that you can see how it works. So assume we would call this note an A sharp. Then we would have F, G, A sharp, C. Well, you see that between A sharp and C, the letter B misses. Well, you can only fix this by saying, okay, this has to be something with a B, so a B flat. The other rule says you have to use consecutive letters out of the alphabet. F, G, A. Well, the next note has to be something with B, because this note was an A, so this has to be something with a B. Well, that's why it's a B flat. So we have major scales with sharp notes, and we have major scales with flat notes. We have seen that the G major scale has one sharp note, and the F major scale has one flat note. Are there major scales with more sharp notes or flat notes? Yes, and you are first going to try to find them yourself. Now, how should you proceed? Well, what you should do is to go with a scale with two black notes. But how do you know which scale it is? Notice that we went from C to G. Well, G is exactly 1/5, one perfect fifth up from C. When I go from G, again 1 perfect fifth up, and now we know how to do it because we know the G major scale. So we go just to the 5th note of the G major scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that's the D major scale. Well, it turns out that every time you go a fifth up, you have one more sharp in the scale. So the D major scale will have two sharps. I will put in a table the major scales and the appearance of sharp notes in the major scales. So remember, every time I go with the root a fifth up, a perfect fifth. So using this table, you can try to find out the major scales with sharps. After that, you can try the major scales with flats. Remember, when I went from C to F, C had only white keys, F had one flat key. You see that from C to F, it's a perfect fourth up, but I can also say a fifth down. As you know from the lesson Inversions of Intervals, this is the same, because the inversion of a perfect fourth is a perfect fifth. So what will be my major scale with two flat notes? Well, from F either go a fifth down or a fourth up. Now, since we know the F major scale, it's easier to go a fourth up than a fifth down. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, the B flat major scale is the scale with two flat notes. It's the first scale that starts on a black note. So just apply the major scale formula and one of the two rules, and you will find the B flat major scale. For all the other major scales with more than two flat notes, well, just go every time a fourth up. You will see here the table with major scales with flat notes in the order of appearance of flats. So try it first out yourself, and after that I will give the answers. Okay, I hope you found it yourself. Here are the answers. On the left side of the table you have the major scales with sharps, and on the right side the major scales with flats. Now if you look well, you see 7 major scales on the left side and 7 major scales on the right side. Now how is that possible? 14 major scales. I just told you that there are only 12 different notes. Well, look at the first one. The first one at the left side, the first one on the right side, they're both the C major scale. So that makes already one less. But we still have one major scale too many. Look at the last major scale in the left and the right table. So the F sharp major scale and the G flat major scale. Well, they're both the same. Why? Because they're enharmonic equivalent. F sharp is exactly the same note as G flat. And the scales are also exactly the same. Just look at the notes in the scale and you will see that they're both exactly the same. They're other spellings of the same notes. They're all enharmonic equivalent. So that makes a total of 12 different major scales. One other thing to notice, and I hope you found it yourself, is look at the F sharp major scale. It has an E sharp. Well, an E sharp is of course exactly the same as an F. Now, why would you call it E sharp rather than an F? Well, if you follow the rules exactly about not having a gap between two notes, what I mean that the notes have to be in alphabetical order, or you can also say you may not have 2 times the same letter for a note, well, then you see that it must be an E sharp instead of an F. Same thing for the G flat major scale. It has a C flat. Well, a C flat is of course nothing else than a B. When you applied one of the 2 rules, you see that it must be a C flat instead of a B. Now, why did I mention the enharmonic equivalents F sharp and G flat, but not, for example, D flat and C sharp, because they're also enharmonic equivalent? Why didn't I mention the C sharp major scale? Same thing for A flat. Why didn't I mention the G sharp major scale? Why did I only do it for F sharp and G flat? Well, it's simple. Let me start with the C sharp major scale. This is 1/5 up from F sharp, so that means it has one more sharp note than the F sharp major scale. The F sharp major scale already has 6 sharps, so C sharp would have 7 sharps. In the case of G sharp, which is even 1/5 more up than C sharp, this would result in 8 sharps. Now, what would you rather see? The A flat major scale with 4 flats, or the G sharp major scale with 8 sharps? Well, I think I know the answer. Now, this is of course a whole lot of information, and I can imagine that it's overwhelming, all this information, and you need to practice all the scales in order to know them. First of all, don't try to learn them all 12 at a time, but do it bit by bit. Another thing is you have to practice it, of course. Now, on my website, pianotheoryexercises.com, you will find exercises to practice. Just look for the link under this video, which takes you to the article which describes exactly the same theme, major scales. Scroll down and you will find exercises, interactive exercises that help you practice the major scales.